Welcome to the March 8th Ways and Means meeting. Please join me in Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have any public to participate? Seeing none, we'll move on. Our first budget is conservation, which is account 171 for those of you in the books. And Brad, do we have a subcommittee report?
Yes, we do. Doug and I met with Conservation this morning, and we're reporting that they're requesting $308,567 for their budget. That is 6.27% over guideline. So let me walk through what's going on with that. At first pass, the budget is straightforward. There are no changes to materials and supplies, milk, land management, or stream cleaning. That's all level funded. Salaries are all from contractual negotiations, and the 6.27% is explained with not one but two stipends that are not apparent on an initial read on the budget. Let me do the simpler of the two first. For the Assistant Conservation Administrator, she has the duties of making sure that all of our stormwater, not only stormwater monitoring dictated by EPA, but also you all may recall that there were changes to the local bylaws as to managing stormwater with new construction and such. And so it's really quite a substantial increase in work hours and complication of duties and such. So the administration has agreed that it makes sense to provide a stormwater stipend in the amount of $5,000. The other stipend is referred to as a transitional advisor stipend. This is an 18-month increase, a 10% increase in pay over 18 months for department heads to define their job, do an information download, and to help assist with a management transition. I will put it that way. Without the transitional advisor stipend, thank you to John Denizio for working these numbers. Their budget would have come in at a 2.33% increase, which is indeed under guideline. But with the transitional advisor position added in, that's what puts them to the 6.27%. And again, that's a delta of about $11,000. It's a small increase on a small budget, hence the 6%, but Doug and I agreed that both stipends made sense and were in line with what the town has done in the past, and we voted 2-0 to support.
Welcome, John Keeley. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
I don't think so. Brad did a good job summarizing the budget. I think everything is level funded except for the pay.
Great. Any questions or comments? David?
Thanks, John. So again, the transitional stipend we've seen on many of the department heads that we've gone through. Just again, curious on the assistant conservation, how the stipends are really determined, who ultimately approves them. Is this something that is ongoing or just kind of a year by year? Does it make more sense to raise up a step level or a grade level? Why the stipend versus another way?
Yeah, Dave, we struggle with that as well. Different towns handle it in different ways, and it's something that we're hoping gets covered when we do the compensation plan study that's in process that we've talked about. Eileen is here. Stormwater management came into play several years ago. It started out as relatively minor tasks, has grown substantially over the years in terms of keeping the town in compliance. And I would defer to John or Eileen on the technical aspects of compliance. But there is a significant amount of work that goes along with this. And again, Eileen is here. I think she would tell you that in some communities it's a full-time position. And we've been able to, like we always try to do, everybody chips in and tries to do more with less. And at this point in time, again, it'll be under review as part of the compensation study, but Eileen has agreed to continue on with the numerous and involved additional duties to her position to manage stormwater for us at that place.
Roger.
I guess a follow-up, how big does the job have to be before there's, part-time position for that or some
Well, if we
other?
had to take new positions to this body, we try to do everything we can before adding a new position.
But we love new positions.
Well, again, the town over the years has been very supportive whenever we've needed additional positions. But we try everything in our power to do as much as we can with the staffing we can until that point in time when we have to ask you for assistance. So, again, it's not a lot of fun trying to bring a new position too. The committee, as well as town meeting, has supported us when we've made a good case for an additional position. And again, this may evolve into something more. I think the requirements keep getting more substantial. How often do they renew this permit? Maybe you can just give them
Well, supposedly every 5 years, so they're probably issuing a new permit again in a couple of years, most likely. Just an anecdote, the town, well, I won't say the name of the town, but a town on the South Shore was not in compliance with their EPA permit, and EPA came after them, and they ended up creating a 3-person department to handle their stormwater. They did institute a stormwater utility at the same time, so one of those persons does billing for the stormwater permit. But it's a big job.
All right, I guess my follow-up,
Some folks charge a fee for it to actually pay for the covering of the services. We're been averse to fees over the years. John, can you just give them a little bit of an overview of what the permit entails?
Sure.
I'll tell you my simplistic version is making sure that the stormwater that's reaching our streams and our lakes and ponds is clean and free of contaminants. So that's my layman's terms thing for you. I think John can go into a little bit more detail than that.
Sure, so we actually have a permit to discharge stormwater into the waters of the U.S. from the Environmental Protection Agency. So it's a permit with a federal agency, which we have to, every year we have to give them annual reports of all the things we've done, whether it's education, outreach, monitoring of stormwater outfalls, all sorts of things like that. And the permit's issued theoretically every 5 years. We've actually only had 2 of them since the first one in 2003 or 4, because it's taken so long because of litigation and whatnot. Each time they try to come up with a new one, they get stricter and they get challenged by communities. So we're operating under a permit which I think was 2019?
2016, it came into effect in 2018. They started drafting the new one already.
Yeah, so they're already working on the new one, which will probably come into effect within the next 2 or 3 years if it's not litigated too heavily. So the EPA really pays attention. I mean, we send them reports, they monitor them, and make sure we're in compliance. Communities that haven't been in compliance, they've come down on it pretty hard in the past.
And just to sort of dovetail on that a little bit, I think one of the next requirements of the permit is for us to start allocating some funding on capital type projects, demonstration projects. I'm not sure exactly what the terminology is, but you will see the first of those as submitted by Public Works. And I believe they're the types of things that we're going to be investing in parking lots and various things to fill in the blank. Retrofit the parking lots to allow less stormwater to get to the streams.
Yeah, clean the stormwater, basically.
So you'll see the first one of those this year coming from Public Works.
follow-up, John?
Yeah.
So on the fee side, who would be paying the fees? I mean, I assume that private residents and commercial people would have some of the responsibility for the outfalls. The town has a lot of its own sewer management, sewer and outfalls to take care of, but what's kind of the split of the work that gets done between just the town maintaining its own facilities versus supervising things on private property?
So our department oversees all the construction projects in town, basically. So anytime anybody's building a construction project, any commercial project, any large residential project, which includes every new house, they file a fee with us and get a permit. And additionally, the town has responsibilities to maintain its own infrastructure. The town is responsible for increased rates of street sweeping and catch basin cleanings, which the DPW is responsible for. They give all those records to Eileen, who then has to report all that to the EPA. So the town is responsible for that. As Paul just referred to, the town is also going to be responsible for upgrading its infrastructure. Every year they're going to, we're going to have a list of 5 projects that we can basically retrofit existing facilities to increase, the stormwater treatment. And each year we're going to have to start doing one of those projects. And keep maintaining a list of 5 future projects.
It sounds like something that's parallel to the infiltration and the I&I program, but different?
I think it's different. The inflow infiltration program is intended to keep water out of the sewer system. So whether,
Okay.
I forget which is which, but one of them is basically natural occurrence where maybe groundwater comes up and gets into a sewer pipe. Obviously, it goes down to Deer Island, and we don't want to be paying to treat clean water. And then you have, I guess, what you would call illicit discharges, and those would be illegal sewer hookups where somebody had a sump pump hooked up to the sewer, things of that nature. And I forget which is inflow and which is infiltration, but one of them is each. One of them is sort of the intentional, and one of them is sort of the unintentional.
All right, but this is the other system. This is not the
Yeah,
sanitary
this
sewer
is
discharge.
basically the stormwater system.
Okay, thanks.
Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to be clear, when permits are pulled to do any kind of construction, it reaches a certain level where surface runoff and groundwater and drainage and whatnot have to be taken care of by virtue of the construction and the permitting. Are the fees for the permitting of the construction covering that aspect of stormwater management already? Or are we not collecting any? In other words, we're doing the work to figure out what has to happen with the stormwater and the drainage, make sure the design is right, approve it and whatnot. Do we get any reimbursement for that aspect of the work that we do when we're permitting something?
So we have a fee structure for if somebody's building a house. We have actually, the Conservation Commission just, since the bylaw passed, they raised the fees to, because they changed the thresholds at the last town meeting. And they've adjusted the fees accordingly. But so the thought is, I mean, basically, when the commission's reviewing a construction project, we're trying to reduce the liability to the town. We're trying to reduce the amount of water coming off that lot into the town's municipal storm system. So if somebody's tearing down a house and building a new house, we're trying to force them to keep more of the water on their lot and infiltrate it and have less of it go down into the street drainage system. So
And they pay for whatever remediation or construction's needed to meet the requirements that you've placed on them
right,
to keep
that's
the
part of the
water on the
permit.
lot.
They're required to
Right.
put it in dry wells or
Right.
infiltrators on
Okay.
their lot.
So the reason I'm asking is because I feel like wherever we can fairly equitably collect fees for things that are being built, done, expanded, commercially or residentially, we really should do that rather than be in the model of we're not a fee-based community. But I don't see this as falling in that category. The broad amount of work that's got to be done on our end is municipal work for projects in order to make the groundwater management more effective. And so there's no fee we can collect for that. That's really got to come out of capital improvements, I think.
So Frank, I'm sorry if I was confusing on that a little bit. What some communities have chosen to do, if you want to liken it more to a trash fee, where they've said, these are the costs of our trash program, we're going to recoup that by issuing a fee to all the homeowners and businesses, or,
Yeah,
so this would be more
What?
akin to, as opposed to an individual coming in and saying, hey, we're going to charge you this, it would be more of a, we're spending X amount of dollars on stormwater management
As a
program.
municipality.
Let's divvy it up
Yeah,
as a fee
okay.
to individual homeowners or individual businesses.
Yeah,
So I'm sorry
okay.
if I wasn't clear.
no, I wasn't sure, as much my wanting to be sure. So I think it's reasonable for us to not get into that, go deeper into that model, because if you're gonna start that, you've gotta have an enterprise fund for just about every municipal service. The only exception, I think, is that we do subsidize municipal water pretty significantly. We don't know how much, but that's something, you and I have talked about that, Paul. It's got nothing to do with conservation. But at some point, it might be good to know to what extent we subsidize, not so much the first gallon, but the third and fourth tier gallons that go out the door. I already know we've got a stratified rate for water, but I still think it's probably very heavily subsidized. And I just wonder if at some point we should at least know what that subsidy turns out to be. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just for the record, historically, the water, last time that we calculated it was approximately 50% subsidized by the tax bill, and I think sewer was about 15% subsidized by the tax bill.
Okay.
But we can definitely refresh.
Well, that's that's a pretty good estimate to start with, and either we want to go after that or we don't.
Yeah, that'll be a good thing to bring up with DPW when they come along.
Yeah,
Time to discuss that.
yeah, I mean, this may not be even the time and place to talk about it. I mean, it's a new program if you're gonna do that, but, so thank you.
Chris?
I had a couple questions. So is the stormwater interns different from the pay part-time summer help and land management?
Yes, those are different people. And so the stormwater intern, last year, we actually, I don't think had one. The year before, we had a couple. It'll vary from year to year, depending upon what the sampling tasks are. I think there's a good chance we will have at least one this summer. And the land management person works on our conservation lands, so there's nothing to do with stormwater. We have a person now part-time, and she patrols the conservation areas, maintains the trails, interfaces with the public, educating people about the conservation.
And then I guess my question is then, if it's a part-time work, why is it not listed under part-time position and it's in the miscellaneous expenses?
That's a good point. It's just the way we've been doing it for a while. I mean, I can change it in the future if that's what you want, but it's just the way we've been doing it.
And then, are there any qualifications that are needed for the interns when you're looking to fill those positions?
Yes, so basically somebody who's studying, usually they're undergraduates studying environmental studies or something related to that.
Great, thanks.
Anyone else?
Move to approve. Second?
Thank you. We're all here, so we can do it with hands. Excellent. So this is to approve the budget of $308,567. Those in favor, raise your hands. Excellent. Opposed? Abstained? All right, that's 11-0-0 on that. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
I'm going to suggest we go out of order so Julian doesn't have to watch our whole meeting. So let's go on to accounting, which is account 135. And David, David, do you have a subcommittee report?
do. Thank you.
And do an introduction when you get there.
I have it right in front, Roger.
Thank you.
So welcome, Julie. This is Julie De La Rey,
Yes.
and she is the new town accountant, so this is our first meeting with us. We had our first subcommittee meeting with her.
Yes.
But welcome,
Thank you.
Julie. We're getting the fun stuff. So this year, the increase is 7.17%, which can be discussed. The what I'll say from an expense line item standpoint, everything, again, level funded. So again, it goes all into the salaries, that the changes are reflective. So, bottom line is there was a person that left the accounting area and went over to the school department. The replacement came from the treasurer's department, and that person was at a higher step, but followed through into the department. So basically, you have a new person in that department that was at a higher level than the person that had left. So that's ultimately what resulted in the higher step and the increase to that area. You then have normal contractual obligations and what have you. Also, there was the step reconfiguration that we went through on some of the lower tiers. The step 1, in essence, is now a step 3, so that bump was there as well. But ultimately, that's where it's the same department with, except for the one new person, the same number of people in the department. Again, supplies and melt and all that, again, have remained exactly the same. So subcommittee voted 2-0 in favor to support.
Julian, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think basically Dave and Frank, we went over this and then they got everything. And then basically there's no change in our expense line, and the only line changes because a person left and it's replaced by a higher step person. So there's an increase in the budget.
Any questions? Roger?
You mentioned there was a transfer from another department. Did you happen to look at the other department to see whether their budget had gone down a little bit?
Treasurer's office, so we have not reviewed that budget yet. Again, the personnel in this department is there.
Because if it's just a shift from one to the other, then there's no big concern about it going up.
Right, so when we review the treasurer's department, we'll certainly do that.
It really holds together.
Stay tuned, is what he's saying. What he should have done.
Money floats, right? It goes, you can push in one
And we
area.
haven't reviewed the schools, so this person went to the schools, so you can
Okay.
take a look
You want me
at
to
that
find
person
that,
that
you
was
want
still
me to
in
find
there.
that salary in that
Okay, so
budget?
with that one person,
We do like to keep track of all of this shuffling around.
Which position was it?
it was the staff, the accounting specialist.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Thank you. All right, and this is for the budget of $486,956. Those in favor, raise your hands. Opposed? Abstain? That's 11-0-0. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Nice to meet you.
All right. Council on Aging would be next, but Marge had an unexpected problem, so we'll be deferring that. Has that been rescheduled yet, Brad, or waiting to see things resolved? Okay. And local transportation will go with that. Which brings us to legal, which is account 151. David, a subcommittee report?
So again, this is a level-funded request from prior years, and actually, it dates back a number of years. We've been at 202 for as long as I can remember. It's a very difficult budget to kind of predict. Again, for legal fees in certain areas, our normal legal fees, the separations of each area. Collective bargaining, which is more labor collective bargaining, isn't necessarily contracts, which the administration handles a good part of that on their own, but this is more for labor issues. Then you got TV negotiation and tax title. You notice in the tax title, there was a large expenditure in 2002, basically the time that Gary came in. in addressing some accounts that should have been addressed. Part of that, again, when you collect on tax title, legal fees are collectible. So you'll notice that spent this year, there's a negative $12,000, and that's because we've collected on some of those legal fees. So again, the whole idea is what number is a reasonable number. We don't wanna cut it so much that we're now trying to fund it some other way down the road. So, you know, we've spent close to that before. We've been at 150, 160 in 21 and 22. So Frank and I both felt this was a reasonable number to continue. Subcommittee 2-0 in favor.
Administration like to add anything to that, or?
I don't think there's anything further to add. Thank you.
Great, okay. Any questions or comments?
Motion to approve?
Second?
Thank you. All right, this is for the budget of $202,000. Those in favor, raise your hand, yes? No? Abstain? Okay. That's 11-0-0. And next is the Select Board / Town Administrator, account 122. We have a subcommittee report, David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this number came in right at the 375 level. 931,051. There was a small adjustment from the department request to the supervisory, which I'll discuss in a little bit. It's really backing off a little bit of the economic development expenses. So department head count is the same. So the contractual increases are really what you're seeing there. There's no difference in head count or personnel. The budget, as I said, does include the economic development area with Melissa's as the line item and her expenses. Her expenses are basically that material and supply section that you see in the third page. So we did have, again, a very good discussion, just as far as at some point, you know, whether the economic development area is really its own budget. It's not there yet, so we continue to have this within the Select Board and the administration's budget. Expense line items, for the most part, contracted services, again, remain the same. You have Select Board initiatives that we, and affordable housing numbers that we've discussed in prior years, and those numbers are staying the same. We did talk a little bit about the incentive program. Last year was a communication effort that went through. The materials and supply are really the economic development area. And certainly, first year number, the prior request was at 54,000. Did receive a grant which brought it then down to a $40,000 expense. They did make some cuts to this area from an increase standpoint, but they're still at the 49,300. And certainly, given all the initiatives that are going on in the town, the rezoning, we may actually see higher numbers in that area as we go forward and try and promote the town. So with that said, the subcommittee voted 2-0 in favor of supporting this budget.
Anything additional from administration?
Nothing further, Mr. Chairman. Here to answer questions.
Steve?
Just a quick question. What were the technical services removed? It was $5,000 worth.
In the economic development budget?
Yeah.
They won't be removed, but it will be covered through different resources. That's things like Google Analytics, and, you know, how we're communicating and getting the word out.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Roger?
Can you remind me what contracted services are used for the affordable housing?
So this was new last year, where we dedicated some resources when we increased the fee for demolition, home demolition, and we had a separate warrant article last year to add this 40,000 in for support services in the area of affordable housing. What this consultant does is sort of liaison between the housing partnership and the administration, and does some administrative type work for when we have sales for Grandview, for recertifications for our affordable units that we're the monitoring agent for throughout town, and handle our state housing inventory stock, or affordable housing inventory stock. So those are the type of things that this person is handling.
Is it something, I mean, that's a good chunk of change. Is that something that Burlington should have the expertise on staff for?
So, oh, good.
No, I'll just say, I think we had it on the list of potential future initiatives that we talked about at our last meeting, along with the sustainability, the different positions that have come forward. I think if you would ask the housing partnership, they would say, yes, we should have a full-time person dedicated to this function. We formally, before we added this warrant article last year, we really didn't provide barely any resources of this nature to the committee, so we're somewhere in the middle at this point. And I think from our standpoint, we're trying to figure out what's the right model between employee and consultant. Some of the stuff is pretty highly specialized, and, you know, the housing stuff, from our perspective, seems to be a little bit feast and famine. You know, you may have a year where very few of the units turn over, and we're sort of the in-between person on the transfer to ensure that the housing changes hands to another affordable buyer. And those things tend to come sporadically, but I could say in terms of Grandview, we've had quite a few units turn over recently. It makes sense. I think most of the units were purchased originally in 2007. So that demographic is moving on to other places. And as a result of that, we've had quite a bit of activity. So it's difficult to sort of pinpoint the activity we may have every year. So we're really experimenting with what the best model is going forward. And again, I think we'll be relying on the housing partnership folks to keep us in the loop as to what's the right mix between employee and consultant on this.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions? Chris?
So I noticed the training professional development went up by $700. You want to talk a little bit about the training and professional development, what that entails? Is it just for the admin? Is it for the select board? Is it for both?
So training and professional development, it would be, in this budget, would be for select board or anybody in that department. That specific it may be linked to, I'm just looking to see if there's a description in the line, but that's the one that's in the ED budget. So that's specifically for the ED folks, in the materials and supplies, because that's basically where we capture all of the economic development budget. And that's for Melissa and her staff to continue to go to, you know,
Got it.
conferences and more.
So that's more for executive, for the ED, not for the select board or admin?
Correct, yep.
All right, so the only reason I asked was there's been a lot of talk in this, during the select board for DEI, professional development, for admin and for select board. And so I guess my secret hope was a $700 increase, maybe that was coming from there. And then I think my other question is there just some examples on what some of the initiatives the select board used the $10,000 for over the past year?
This past year, again, was the communications project with the Collins Center. The first phase of that was presented to the board the other night. That was done through a grant that Whitney was able to get from us from the state, and there was a second component to that, which would be the recommendations as to how we can communicate better with the citizens, and that was funded out of this line in this year's budget. I can't say what the board will have for an initiative in the upcoming year. And Chris, I think you'll see the board moving forward with a warrant article to possibly address DEI-type training for town meeting. It's not in this budget right here.
Great.
What's the difference between the subscriptions in material and supplies and the dues and subscriptions under MELT?
The materials and supplies is where we capture the economic development budget. Sort of the line we use that, we know that those are all the expenses for economic development specifically. So that's gonna be any subscriptions for their department versus the department as a whole.
We discussed with the subcommittee a little bit at what point should economic development possibly be broken out into its own budget as opposed to commingled here, but for the sake of keeping ourselves straight, we try to keep all of the economic development expenses to hit the materials and supplies line. I know the words don't line up with what it is, technically speaking, but again, we'll have an ongoing discussion as to what the right point is, that we should break that out into its own department.
I'm curious about the Bring Me to Burlington website and social media and so forth. I'm just curious, with 41,000 going to that, do we have any kind of stats on website hits or what kind of engagement we're getting from that program?
We did have one update at a board meeting earlier this year. We probably should update that relatively soon. It's a relatively new, I think it's only been around for about a year now. So it's up and coming, and we've gotten a lot of compliments on it. And I think when Melissa first started, we went to the MMA trade show, and we both went to an economic development thing, and that was the number one item that they suggested that folks start with to just sort of get on the map. And that's sort of where she started when she walked in. So, but there are statistics available, and we can schedule some time to talk to the committee about that if you wish.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be interesting. Just, it's always hard to measure the value of advertising, of course, but it would be good to understand if we're getting some bang for that buck. Right.
Just to follow up on that, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I just had an opportunity to sit next to somebody that's in the construction business. And so I asked him, I said, what are you really working on these days? And the answer was not surprising, but surprising. There's a lot of new development related to, you might call it biotech, particularly lab space. Burlington has a bite of that apple, but we're not the only ones. We're definitely not the only ones. And it is a moving investment area in economic development. And so this outreach, a lot of this outreach really is to, I think, help us garner interest from those that we might not otherwise as upfront as possible. It's clearly an area of large development, lots of money being spent on it, and a lot of space being built. So I think measuring what we're getting for our money is important. Also asking ourselves if we're doing as much outreach as we need to in order to stay, in the 1, 2, or 3 position of grabbing the opportunities. And it's the mini-max of what kind of space have you got that's owned by private people that want to redevelop it for that, and what kind of people are shopping for it, and try to put that portfolio together more aggressively. So that's what I think this is really about, and it's hard to know how successful we are, except we are getting a reasonable number of hits in that area. So we know we're making progress, I just don't know how much.
Yes, and I would urge any committee members that haven't been on there to check out the site. It's pretty, they've done a nice job with it. And I think the example that was given in the conference was that somebody who's assigned to moving a growing company someplace is going to be basically laying on their couch on the internet, searching different locations based upon different demographics. And really the recommendation was, we have a town website, obviously, but this is totally commercially facing, commercial focus. It highlights all the great amenities we have here, all the different departments, what they do, all the different clusters that we have in town, and we think we've gotten a lot of kudos on it. We think it's been a pretty effective tool, just in, again, giving us that online presence that we want for these companies as they're looking to relocate.
Great. Any other questions?
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. All right, Mr. is for the budget of for $931,051. Those in favor, raise your hand, yes. Opposed? Abstained? That passes 11-0-0. Thank you. Okay, I believe that's all the budgets we have for tonight. It's just the minutes unless there are other issues before us tonight. I believe that's it. Okay. All right, we have the minutes from, thanks a lot, Paul, John, and Whitney. Actually, just a quick advertisement for next week's meeting. We have coming up quite a few items. We have the library, Board of, hopefully, Board of Health, Rec Department, other legislative, Planning Board, HR, which was moved from tonight, and hopefully Council of Aging, depending on when that gets rescheduled. So, you know, due to various conflicts and so on, we have a schedule that I've sent out, and we have changes to that happening every week. So every week, along with the meeting notice, I'll send an update out of the updated schedule, so you always know what's coming up. And Whitney has said she'll also post that on the Ways and Means website, so you can look at it there, and it will hopefully be consistent with what I sent you. So be on the lookout for that. And what else? That's it. And we are in the middle of, yes.
Just one other thing, Mr. Chairman. At some point in the next few weeks, the accommodated accounts from our schedule, if you can kind of list out the ones that generally get included in that, so we can make sure all the subcommittees are aware for subcommittee meetings.
Yes, yes, good point.
It's not until
It's like-
April.
Yeah, so on April 5th, there is something that
items.
just says accommodated accounts. I'll break that out into specifically what those are
Yeah.
with the associated subcommittees, so because it is easy to forget something. In general, we try to keep the accommodated accounts with the related department, but, you know, as you mentioned, there are some things that won't be ready in time, or it just works out better for another time. So in particular, we have moved the Middlesex retirement and debt to April 5th instead of doing it with the treasurer collector where it was originally.
So, related to that, Mr. Chairman, we don't have a pro forma debt schedule update at this point, do we? Or by this, we don't?
Nope.
We don't, usually get that spreadsheet that you can't read. So that's they're working on that, and that's a big piece of why they need more time, and we're probably gonna need some time too. There's gonna be a lot in it.
Which is
That
fine.
one. And the other accommodated account, schools will go with schools, right?
Yeah.
It always does.
Yes, and we also are grouping the school warrant articles with schools, so every schools will be all in one night as opposed to spreading it out,
Yeah.
which hopefully will make it easier.
And that'll include Shawshene as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
And right, but that's, nobody's coming to visit us for that.
Really?
That's an assessment.
Oh, and related to these bigger budgets, so the recommendations on free cash, that usually comes,
Before, yeah.
right, so we don't know when they're gonna be ready for that, do we? So, just to get kind of a heads up to the committee, there's a lot of free cash, but there are a lot of needs, and it's not at all clear what, if anything, we would service in this round with the free cash, other than, the chopped off list of warrant articles, right? We set up a budget, say we'll give this much to it, everybody see what you can do with it, and then come back with your priorities. And we don't even know how much that bucket's going to be at this point.
So, yeah, for the new members, Town Hall 1 typically has gone through a free cash discussion, where we look at where free cash was certified, we look at what the administration is recommending for warrants, both school and town side, what other items we may be able to alleviate the bond schedule with,
Buy
or
downs
what
on
have you,
that, yeah.
how much we want to carry over. So we'll have a discussion with the administration, have a discussion here, because that then goes into, the warrant discussion, it's schools,
being.
That'll probably be at the end, though, I think.
Yeah, but again, if the schools,
Can't be too
we had,
late.
they were already coming up with their list for their
Yeah.
operating night, so we've got to kind of know what
It was squeezed.
amount of money we're looking at.
When would you like to have that free cash discussion?
Well, we typically have had it before the warrants get discussed, so, I'm assuming that April 5th, that Frank and I will have had, because we're going to be discussing the other accommodated accounts.
That will be part of
Some of them.
that debt discussion.
Yeah.
Probably. There's a cheat sheet that they'll provide. We'll make that available to the committee.
That
Have
makes
some
sense.
debate on that ahead of time.
So again, it's not really a specific voting item, but it's a topic of discussion that we need
But you
to
can
have.
start thinking about it now. You know, everybody may have their own thoughts on what you'd like to use free cash for.
But we don't have to buy a gavel now that we found it.
Excellent.
Okay, anything else before we talk about minutes? Okay, we have last week's minutes, thanks to Jen for getting those out and doing a fabulous job again. Are there any comments on the March 1st minutes before we vote? Very good, all right, those in favor of approving the minutes? Opposed, abstained, 11-0-0.
Thanks, Jen. It's good to get them.
Yeah, actually, they look really well written, so
Yeah, good.
having fought with some issues last year, I really do appreciate.
And the year before.
And the year before, yeah, it was just miserable.
All right, very good. Anything else for tonight? I believe that's it then.
Wow.
To adjourn first?
We're adjourned. But it's on the agenda, we don't have to have a motion.
Oh, very nice.
Another time saver.